Hello and welcome, dear soul. You didn't just click on this video. You were led here. Heaven has been watching, and today, this is your confirmation. Before we dive in, I want to take a heartfelt moment to thank all of you who have supported this mission through super thanks. Your generosity and love have made it possible to keep spreading truth, light, and healing. If this message already resonates in your spirit, comment 777 below as your sign of divine agreement. It's more than a number. It's a signal to heaven that you're ready. Now, let me tell you something that perhaps no one has dared to say to you out loud. God is proud of you. Not because you got everything right. Not because you never cried, doubted, or felt like quitting. But because, against all odds, you kept becoming. You kept walking. You kept believing, even when the world grew silent, even when your heart was shattered, even when the prayers felt unanswered. What kind of strength does it take to stay soft in a world that keeps trying to harden you? Maybe nobody celebrated you when you chose love in the face of betrayal. Maybe no one recognized your quiet victories, those sacred hidden moments when you wanted to scream, but instead chose to breathe. Maybe the world overlooked your goodness because it didn't make noise, but heaven didn't. Heaven saw everything. And here's what I need you to know. The story is far from over. In fact, it's about to turn in your favor in ways so bold, so divine, so unexpected, that even those who once doubted you, dismissed you, or counted you out will be left speechless. God is about to shock everyone who thought you were finished. The very people who whispered behind your back will soon be watching in awe as God lifts you higher, blesses you more abundantly, and vindicates your silent battles. But why now? Why you? Why this moment? Could it be that your wilderness season was actually preparation for your public elevation? Could it be that everything you lost was making room for what's about to arrive? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share next will change how you see everything. God has been building something in secret, and now the unveiling begins. Let's step into the revelation together. God's chosen ones, God is about to shock everyone who thought you were finished. You've been walking with a spiritual integrity that doesn't beg for applause, quietly choosing righteousness when no one was watching and sowing peace where chaos once ruled. While others were looking for recognition, you were doing the deeper work, breaking generational curses, purifying your bloodline, and standing firm in spiritual warfare that others didn't even see. Do you realize the weight of what you've carried and the power of what you've already overcome? Like Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem with one hand while holding a weapon in the other, you've restored what was broken while protecting what God gave you. And just like Esther, who risked everything to bring salvation to her people without knowing how the king would respond, you've made healing decisions without any promise of reward. Every time you chose love over vengeance, forgiveness over resentment, obedience over convenience, you laid another stone in your eternal foundation. I once met a man named Elias, a quiet artist who gave up a lucrative career in advertising to care for his dying mother. No awards, no headlines, but years later, the work he created in that hidden season became the healing balm for countless others battling grief. His sacrifice became someone else's salvation. Isn't that the story of your life too? Every time you held your tongue when anger wanted to roar, every time you walked away when pride said, "Stay and fight," you wrote heaven's language into the atmosphere. You didn't just survive, you sanctified. And what you built in secret, God is about to reveal in the open. Can you sense it? The silence was not empty. It was sacred. You've been constructing something eternal, brick by brick, in the unseen realm. Have you ever watched how a tree stands through every season? Blazing sun, harsh wind, bitter frost. and yet keeps growing. That's you, rooted in God, immovable, bearing fruit in due season, even when the world thought your soil was too dry. And now the season is shifting. You see, God isn't impressed by appearances. He isn't moved by how well you've masked the pain or polished your image to please others. 1 Samuel 16:7 reminds us, "The Lord does not look at the things people look at." People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. That's where your strength has always lived, in the hidden place. You were never asked to perform pain like a rehearsed play. God never needed you to bleed quietly for others to feel comfortable. What He honors is the way you chose to stay real in the storm. You're not being recognized because you suffered silently. You're being honored because through every wave of trial, you chose truth. You stayed grounded. You refused to abandon your light just to fit into dark rooms. You kept showing up, fully human, fully surrendered. And not once did you trade your authenticity for acceptance. That is rare. That is holy. How many people do you know who have wept deeply and still returned to love, not as a feeling, but as a fierce decision? Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. 1 Corinthians 13:7 New Living Translation. You've lived that. You chose mercy when revenge would have been easier. You chose stillness when chaos begged for attention. You chose light. Let me share a name you may know, Howard Schultz, the visionary businessman who built Starbucks into a global brand. What many don't know is that he grew up in a housing complex for the poor. His father was injured and unemployed without insurance, and no one seemed to care. That pain stayed with Howard, but instead of becoming bitter, he rose with compassion. He built a company that prioritized healthcare for all employees, including part-timers. He once said, "Success is best when it's shared." You too have taken your pain and turned it into purpose, not for applause, but because it's who you are. And yet the world still asks, how did you keep going? Think of a pearl. It begins as an irritation, just a grain of sand trapped inside an oyster. But over time, that small wound is coated in layer after layer of beauty until it becomes priceless. Your wounds, too, have become wonder. Your process may have felt hidden, even lonely, but it was never in vain. God saw what you built in the dark, and now He's about to reveal it in the light. Let me tell you about Myra. Just 6 months ago, she was dismissed by everyone as a quiet assistant in a legal firm. What they didn't know was that she was studying case law every night, mentoring abused women by day, and praying without ceasing. Last month, one of those women nominated her for a National Justice Award. Myra walked onto that stage with trembling hands but unshakable peace. That moment didn't make her, it revealed her. Do you see it now? Like a lighthouse battered by the sea, you never stopped shining. Like a tree rooted beside living water, you kept bearing fruit, even in drought. Jeremiah 17:8 says, "They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream." It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. That's been you all along. What if the rejection you faced was really redirection? What if the silence you endured was God's way of shielding you until the right moment? And here it comes. God is about to shock everyone who thought you were finished. Not for the sake of revenge, but for the sake of His glory. Not because you screamed for attention, but because you whispered truth when it mattered most. You've been faithful in the unseen, and now heaven is about to make it visible. What you thought was the end has only been the cocoon. And the wings you've grown in silence, they're ready. There's a sacred kind of power in someone who can walk through fire without becoming what burned them. Someone who can stand face to face with betrayal, rejection, even cruelty, and still choose not to pass that pain forward. That power cannot be taught from a pulpit or written in the pages of any textbook. It's forged, not learned. It's the kind of strength that comes from living through what others wouldn't survive. And you, God's chosen one, whether you realize it or not, are carrying that exact kind of power. Think about Daniel, thrown into the lion's den, not because he did wrong, but because he refused to compromise his integrity. He emerged untouched, not because the lions weren't hungry, but because his spirit couldn't be devoured. That's you. You've been in environments meant to consume you. Rooms filled with jealousy, homes echoing with misunderstanding, seasons soaked in silence. And still, you didn't become bitter. You didn't lose your softness. You preserved your purity while walking through poison. Have you ever seen how gold is purified? It's placed in fire so hot it melts everything impure off the surface. But the gold itself remains. In fact, it becomes more valuable. Your trials have done the same. They didn't ruin you, they refined you. There's a quote by Maya Angelou, an iconic American poet and civil rights activist who endured unspeakable trauma in her early life, yet became a voice of grace and power. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. That's the spirit you've carried. The flame may have reached your skin, but it never scorched your soul. Let me tell you about Enoch, a quiet high school janitor in a town no one talks about. For years, he was mocked for always smiling, for singing hymns under his breath, for helping students who ignored him. But after one tragic school incident, it was Enoch who stepped in with courage no one expected. Suddenly, his years of unnoticed goodness became a foundation for healing. They said, "We never knew he carried that kind of strength." And yet, he always had. It just didn't roar. It radiated. Now think of nature. Consider the lotus. It blooms in muddy water, untouched by the filth around it. It rises through darkness and still emerges clean, full of beauty. That's your spirit. You've been surrounded by situations meant to stain you, yet somehow you kept your soul unstained. So let me ask you, how rare is it in today's world to find someone who can absorb pain and still produce peace? Who can break cycles simply by choosing not to repeat them? This is the power you carry. It's sacred, it's seen, and very soon the world will see it too. You've taught God more about faith than most people ever will, not because he needed to learn from you, but because your life became a living sermon of what faith truly looks like in human form. Your faith didn't grow in safety. It wasn't born in comfort or stability. It was carved in the in-between, the waiting rooms of heaven, the silent nights when prayers seemed unanswered, the wilderness where nothing made sense, and yet you stayed. You clung to the promise when there was no proof. You kept walking forward even when the path disappeared beneath your feet. That kind of faith can't be copied. It's not the faith of convenience, it's the faith of covenant. And that's what makes it holy. Like Abraham, who was asked to leave everything familiar without even knowing where he was going, you moved in obedience long before the breakthrough came. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out, not knowing where he was going. Hebrews 11:8. You too followed the whisper of God's voice while others demanded thunder and signs. And because of that, the blessings coming to you now carry a different weight. They don't feel random, they feel sacred. Because they weren't handed to you, they were harvested. They weren't given to impress you, they're returning to honor you. This isn't just your time in some vague, feel-good cosmic cycle. This is divine alignment. This is the shift when your truth finally starts to echo louder than your trials. It's when the sound of your faith drowns out the noise of your former pain. Let me tell you about Imani, a young gospel singer who went viral not for a performance on a big stage, but for the way she kept singing hymns outside her burned-down church. No instruments, no spotlight, just her voice, trembling but firm. When someone asked why she still sang, she said, "Because the God I serve didn't burn with the building." Months later, she was invited to perform for world leaders at a peace summit. Not because she chased opportunity, but because her faith created a sound that heaven couldn't ignore. Have you ever watched how rivers carve valleys into stone, not with force, but with faithfulness? That's you. Day after day, you've shown up, and slowly, quietly, you've reshaped what looked immovable. Or think of the stars. For thousands of years, they've burned from distances we can barely fathom, and yet their light still reaches us. Your faith has been like that, forged in far-off seasons, but now it's shining through, touching lives you'll never even meet. So, what if everything you've endured has been preparing the stage for the truth of your life to finally ring out? What if this is the moment when heaven turns the volume up on what's always been inside you? Yes, it's your time, but more than that, it's your truth, finally catching up to its season. You earned this season in silence, not through loud victories or public recognition, but through late nights when your soul wrestled with God and still chose peace. Through quiet acts of obedience when no one clapped, no one noticed, and yet you kept going. You built this moment, brick by invisible brick, through discipline disguised as defeat and restraint mistaken for weakness by those who never understood your depth. They didn't see the nights you stayed up praying when you could have given in to bitterness. They didn't see the moments you could have spoken out in anger, but instead chose silence, because your spirit whispered, "Not everything needs to be defended." They saw your stillness and called it passivity, but heaven called it strategy. How many people could have endured what you did and still kept their posture in grace? How many could have made decisions that looked foolish to the world, yet were entirely aligned with the Spirit? Think of Jesus in the wilderness, 40 days without food, alone, tempted by every lie the enemy could throw. And yet he chose restraint. He didn't need to prove his power to anyone. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Matthew 4:4. That same kind of inner resolve lives in you. You didn't chase approval, you aligned with purpose. Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Galatians 6:9. Doesn't that feel like your story? You didn't give up in the waiting. You stayed planted. You stayed grounded. This season didn't arrive because luck found you. It arrived because heaven has been watching the way you've held your line. When others needed results, you needed peace. When others needed proof, you needed presence. You made decisions that didn't make sense on paper, but they were deeply spiritually correct. And now the harvest is here, not because you forced it, but because you were faithful. Let me tell you about Viola Davis, the award-winning actress known for her powerful roles and unshakable presence. But before the spotlight, she grew up in deep poverty, in a home without consistent food or security. Many would have given up. But Viola once said, "All dreams are within reach. All you have to do is keep moving towards them." Her success was not sudden. It was the fruit of years of silent endurance. Her discipline, her faith, her ability to rise above what tried to define her, mirrors what you've done in your own way. And then there's Marina, a young architect who declined a high-profile job offer in a prestigious firm because it didn't sit right in her spirit. People said she was foolish, but a year later she partnered with a community rebuilding project in a disaster-stricken town. That project opened doors for her to design sustainable housing globally. Her peace led her into purpose. Sound familiar? There's a reason eagles fly alone. Their altitude isn't meant for flocks. You too have soared in seasons where no one could come with you. But in that solitude, you've grown sharper, stronger, clearer, like the bamboo that takes years to break the surface, then suddenly shoots up feet in days. Your time of hiddenness was not dormancy, it was development. And now God is honoring what you did when no one was watching, the tears you didn't explain, the sacrifices you never justified, the paths you chose simply because your spirit said, "This is the way, walk in it." Isaiah 30:21. Do you realize how rare that is? In a world obsessed with speed, applause, and validation, you chose alignment, integrity, and surrender. And now you're not just entering a new season, you're stepping into the manifestation of everything your spirit built in silence. So now something shifts, not suddenly, but undeniably. The light you've been cultivating in private, the quiet strength, the hidden worship, the prayers soaked in tears, starts to ripple outward like sunlight, finally breaking through the fog. Have you noticed it? The atmosphere around you feels different. The peace you used to battle for with everything in you now arrives with less resistance. Doors that were once sealed shut begin to open, not because you pushed harder, but because you prepared deeper. And now people begin to feel something around you that even they can't explain. They pause, they soften, they sense a presence in you that surpasses explanation. That's not charisma. That's not coincidence. That's the fruit of a soul that didn't quit. Jesus said in Matthew 6:6, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." What if this moment, this calm, this grace, this growing sense of clarity is that reward beginning to bloom? You didn't arrive here by accident. You planted this moment in the soil of perseverance. You watered it with faith when nothing was visible. You shielded it with silence while others shouted. And now the seed is breaking through. Think of the sunflower. It turns its face to follow the sun throughout the day, even before the clouds part. You've done the same. You turned your spirit again and again toward God, even when the light was hidden, even when your surroundings didn't change. And now, without even trying, you've become a source of light for others to follow. Let me ask you this. Isn't it astonishing how the same people who overlooked your process now feel drawn to your presence? Look at someone like Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers, an unassuming children's television host who radiated warmth, kindness, and peace. What many don't know is that behind his calm demeanor was a deeply spiritual man who prayed for every child who watched his show. He once said, "Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable." His peace wasn't for performance. It was the overflow of inner work, and it changed generations. Let me also tell you about Jordan, a young nurse who worked night shifts during a pandemic. No one knew how much he cried in the hospital stairwell between patient rooms. No one knew he fasted during breaks or kept a small Bible in his pocket. But something about him made people feel safe, even in chaos. One doctor said, "When he walks in the room, everything feels lighter." That's not coincidence. That's what happens when someone refuses to quit in the dark. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. You've lived this without striving, and now the ripple effect begins, not from striving to be seen, but from standing firm when no one was watching. This is the shift you've been sensing, not external praise, but internal proof. You didn't give up, and now heaven is echoing that truth into every room you enter. And maybe you still feel unsure about it. Maybe the shift feels too soft, too unfamiliar, like shoes that almost fit, but not quite yet. Maybe you're still learning to believe that goodness can find you without dragging chaos behind it like a shadow. After all, how many years did you spend in survival mode, bracing for impact even when things seemed calm? Perhaps joy feels foreign, like a language you once spoke fluently, back when you laughed without checking over your shoulder, when peace didn't feel borrowed or conditional. And now, as it begins to return, you wonder, Am I allowed to receive this without having to earn it through pain? But here's the truth. You are. And not because you manifested it perfectly, or prayed the right way, or got all the timing correct. This isn't a reward for spiritual perfection. This is the fulfillment of divine faithfulness. Psalm 103:10 reminds us, He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. In other words, grace is never transactional. You didn't have to be flawless to be favored. Even in your doubt, God never doubted you. Even when you thought you broke beyond repair, God still saw the blueprint of what He created. Isaiah 49:16 says, See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. You were never forgotten, not for one moment. So, if you're feeling joy trickle back into your life, even if it arrives gently, let it. You don't need to question it. You've already been prepared for it in ways you don't yet understand. Let me tell you about J.K. Rowling, now one of the world's most celebrated authors. Before her breakthrough, she was a single mother, battling depression and living off welfare. She once said, "Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life." Joy didn't come to her through ease. It came because, despite every setback, she never stopped holding the thread of something better. Like you, she didn't wait until life was perfect. She moved forward when it was still messy. Or think of Amir, a fiction editor I once met who used to feel numb every time someone said, "You deserve happiness." After years of caregiving, loss, and silent sacrifice, he forgot how to receive without guilt. But slowly, the light returned, through kindness, through friendships, through faith. He said to me once, "I didn't even know joy was knocking because I'd trained myself to ignore the door." Isn't that what survival can do? Make blessings feel suspicious. But now, something different is happening. Joy isn't knocking for permission. It's walking through the doors your endurance unlocked. The peace that's arriving now is not a reward, it's restoration. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Psalm 30, verse 5. Morning is here, even if your eyes are still adjusting. So if you feel unworthy or unprepared, don't worry. Grace knows how to find you, even when you're still learning to speak its language again. The divine knew exactly what it was doing when it placed that spirit in your body. Nothing about you is accidental. Not your timing, not your temperament, not even your tears. Every part of your being was crafted with intentionality. Do you think your ability to feel deeply, to see through falsehood, and to speak with weight is random? It's not. It's divine design. God gave you eyes that see deeper than the surface, eyes that recognize what's holy even in brokenness. He gave you a heart that feels further, not to overwhelm you, but to awaken others through you. And He gave you a voice that carries more authority than you realize, not to make noise, but to bring clarity into confusion. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Job 33:4. That breath still moves through you now. You are what healing looks like in motion, not polished, not perfect, but real. Healing isn't a final destination. It's the way you continue to show up, honest and open, even with scars still visible. Have you ever seen how a river, after a flood, doesn't just destroy, but carves out new land, making room for fertile ground? That's you. Your pain hasn't just reshaped you, it's prepared you to carry something greater. You are what integrity looks like in a world that rewards performance. When shortcuts were tempting, you stayed on the narrow road. When applause was available, but not authentic, you turned it down. Better is a poor person who walks in his integrity than one who is crooked in speech and is a fool. Proverbs 19:1. You didn't trade your essence for attention. You didn't become someone else just to be more palatable. Isn't that rare? Let me ask you this. How many people can look in the mirror and still recognize their soul after everything they've survived. Look at Keanu Reeves, one of the world's most respected actors, not for being flashy, but for being real. After losing his daughter and the love of his life, he didn't harden, he grew more tender. Known for his quiet generosity and deep humility, he reminds people that pain doesn't have to turn us cruel. He walks with integrity, just like you have, without the need to be noticed, simply because it's who he is. You are what it means to walk as a soul that remembers its source, even when the world forgets. When everyone else races, you return to stillness. When voices around you shout, you listen for the whisper of God. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. John 10:27. And even when doubt surrounded you, you never lost your compass. Imagine the roots of a tree. You don't see them, but they are what hold everything up. Your roots in God run deep. That's why you're unshaken, even in storms. Have you ever noticed how sunflowers always face the light, even on cloudy days? You've done the same. You keep turning your face toward heaven, even when it felt like the sun disappeared. I'll tell you about Nadira, a young sculptor who was told for years her work was too raw for public display, but she never stopped. One of her most emotional pieces, a sculpture born out of heartbreak, was later placed in a trauma healing center. She didn't make it for fame. She made it because something holy moved through her hands. And that's how healing looks when it walks, breathes, and speaks, like you. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. That's not just a promise, it's a calling. You are not here to blend in. You are here to remind people what wholeness looks like after the breaking. So when you feel unseen, misunderstood, or even misplaced, pause and ask, what if I was made for this exact moment? Because you were. And the proof is in how you're still standing, still shining, still rooted in the one who never forgets his own design. And listen, it hasn't been easy. You know that better than anyone. The most sacred transformations rarely are. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the stretch, in the ache, in the moments where your soul has no script and your heart has no roadmap. There were nights when sleep never came, when your mind raced through fears you never told a soul about. There were mornings when simply opening your eyes felt like a battle. You didn't have the strength to fight again, and yet you did. There were moments when everything in you wanted to retaliate, to fire back, to give people what they gave you. But instead, you released. You let it go, even when it shattered you. That wasn't weakness. That was spiritual authority in disguise. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called so that you may inherit a blessing. 1 Peter 3:9. You lived this verse without even realizing it. You chose mercy over vengeance, peace over pride, and heaven noticed. That version of you, the quiet warrior, is the one heaven celebrates the loudest, not the curated version, not the one with the brave smile and the rehearsed answer, but the one who wrestled and stayed, the one who bent without breaking, the one who surrendered without quitting. How many people could have gone through what you did and still chosen softness, still believed in beauty, still opened their hands instead of clenching their fists, still prayed when the silence felt like abandonment? Have you ever watched how a butterfly emerges from its cocoon? It struggles, it shakes, it seems like it won't make it, but the struggle is what strengthens its wings. Without it, it can't fly. You've been in that same cocoon, the tight place, the hidden place, the sacred space where no one else could go with you. And now, you're not just surviving, you're stretching your wings. Bethany Hamilton, the professional surfer who lost her arm in a shark attack at just 13 years old, never let tragedy write the end of her story. She returned to the ocean with one arm and unshakable purpose. Courage doesn't mean you don't get afraid, she said. Courage means you don't let fear stop you. That same spirit has lived in you every time you moved forward, even when fear screamed louder than hope. There was once a man named Elias who spent 3 years caring for his paralyzed father while silently working night shifts to support the family. He never once complained. When asked why he never broke down, he simply said, "Because I knew heaven was watching when no one else was." And he was right, because not all crowns are visible. Some are worn in the way you endure. Blessed are those who persevere under trial, because having stood the test, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised. James 1:12. You've stood the test, not because you always felt strong, but because you never stopped showing up. So don't underestimate that honest version of you, the one with shaky faith but steady feet. That's the one God chooses. That's the one God crowns. That's the one whose name heaven echoes with pride. You don't need to earn a seat at the divine table anymore. You've already built it. Every nail driven by your resilience, every plank formed by your love, every leg anchored by your decision to keep walking when you had every reason to sit down. You didn't beg for a place. You created it through every unseen victory and every surrendered moment. This table was never about status. It was always about spirit. And now that seat is being prepared, not out of pity, but out of promise. The same God who watched you weep in silence, who saw you sow seeds of faith when the soil looked barren, is now placing honor in your hands. And it's not a favor, it's a response. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. James 4:10. That lifting is happening now, not because you shouted for attention, but because you lived with intention. You didn't just survive, you sanctified every step of your journey. The table being set for you isn't made of gold to impress people. It's made of grace to remind you that every sacrifice mattered. You kept loving when bitterness would have been easier. You kept serving when no one thanked you. You held on to hope like a candle in the wind, and somehow it never went out. Picture a tree growing on the edge of a cliff, wind-beaten, sun-scorched, alone, and yet it stands tall. Why? Because its roots reach deeper than the surface reveals. That's what your life has looked like to heaven. What others saw as stubbornness was sacred grounding. What looked like silence was strategic obedience. Malachi, a teacher who spent decades in a rural school with no acclaim or applause, gave everything to a generation of forgotten children. He never made headlines, but years later, one of his students became a national leader and credited him with saving his life. Malachi didn't teach for recognition. He taught because he believed in sowing when others stopped watering. Now, his name is carved into history in ways he never asked for. What if your life is the same? What if the seat God is preparing for you isn't a reward for performance, but the natural result of your posture? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Psalm 23, verse 5. That's the season you're walking into, not because you forced it, but because grace responds to truth, honor responds to humility, and God responds to faithfulness. So, here you are now, standing at the edge of a life that finally recognizes you, a life that no longer asks you to shrink, to explain, to prove yourself worthy, just to be accepted. And maybe it feels strange. Maybe you're not used to this kind of ease, to doors opening without a battle cry, to people honoring your presence without demanding a performance. You've spent so long climbing uphill that level ground feels suspicious. But this isn't a trick. This is timing. It's your turn now. Let that sink in. Not just your turn for peace, but for joy. Not just to survive another day, but to expand into every inch of who you were always becoming. Because there's a difference between getting by and being blessed. And for too long, you've only known how to endure. But now you're about to remember how to receive. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. 1 Peter 5:10. That promise is not coming, it's here. You're standing at the threshold of the restoration that's been written over you from the beginning. How many times did you settle for less because you didn't want to be disappointed again? How often did you shrink your prayers because the silence felt unbearable? But now things are different. The soil has shifted. The drought is ending. You're no longer called to beg for what you were born to carry. Think of rain after years of dry land. The first drops don't just nourish, they awaken what's been buried. That's what grace is doing in you now. Not just healing your past, but unlocking the harvest that's been waiting beneath the surface. Amara had spent most of her adult life sacrificing for others, aging parents, children, a job that drained her. But one morning she sat on a park bench and wept, not out of exhaustion, but because she finally felt peace and didn't know what to do with it. For years she thought struggle was her identity. That day, something shifted. She stopped bracing for impact and started embracing stillness. That's what receiving looks like. There's a quiet unfolding happening in you right now. You don't need to run toward it. Just open your hands. Ask, and you will receive, that your joy may be full. John 16:24. The invitation has already been written in heaven, and now it's simply being delivered. This season is not about proving anything. It's about becoming everything God already saw in you. Your spirit knows how to fight, but now it must remember how to open, how to trust, how to rest in the blessing that's not coming as a reward, but as a rightful return. That kind of shift doesn't happen just because time passes. Time alone doesn't heal what alignment hasn't yet touched. This kind of transformation unfolds when your inner truth finally catches up with your outer reality. When alignment meets identity. When your soul stops shrinking to make others comfortable and starts standing in its full stature, not for praise, but because it simply can't stay small anymore. What changed? Could it be that you finally stopped apologizing for who you are? That your spirit refused to keep playing small just to avoid drawing too much attention? You're no longer hiding the weight of who you are. You've carried too much light for too long to keep it dimmed. And make no mistake, your presence is powerful, not because you shout, but because you radiate. You don't just walk into rooms, you shift them, not by demanding attention, but by embodying truth. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Isaiah 61. That glory isn't external recognition, it's the evidence of what heaven has already written over you. You're not just glowing, you're glowing on purpose. You're not just a flicker of hope in someone's darkness. You're living proof that a soul can be both soft and unbreakable, that someone can lose everything and still choose to rebuild without bitterness. How many people do you know who've suffered deep loss and still return to the world with open hands? That kind of resilience doesn't come from ego, it comes from grace. Tina Turner, the legendary singer who endured abuse, poverty, and betrayal, once said, "My legacy is that I stayed on course from the beginning to the end because I believed in something inside of me." She didn't just survive her pain, she transformed it into power, into voice, into vibration, just like you've been doing day by day, without a stage or spotlight. Your legacy is being written not in public applause, but in spiritual alignment. There's a tree known as the fire pine. When wildfires sweep through, it's one of the few that doesn't die. In fact, the intense heat causes its cones to open and release seeds. What looks like destruction actually activates new life. That's your story, too. The fire didn't destroy you. It unlocked you. There was a woman named Layla who lost her home, her business, and her marriage within the same year. Everyone around her expected her to disappear, to grow bitter, to retreat, but she chose to show up to her life anyway, one quiet act of faith at a time. She started planting a garden in the empty lot where her shop once stood. Years later, that garden feeds dozens of families in her neighborhood. She never set out to be a hero. She just refused to stop creating beauty. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. You carry this verse in your bones, and not the loud kind of strength that demands recognition, but the holy kind that rewrites the atmosphere simply by existing. So, if it feels like your soul is expanding, if the life around you can no longer contain the truth within you, it's because the real you is no longer asking for permission to exist. You're not here to fit in. You're here to stand out for the glory of the one who made you, and for those still learning that soft can be strong and broken can still rise. You carry the kind of grace that makes people question their masks, the kind of presence that disrupts performance without saying a word. There's something in you, steady, sincere, sacred, that makes others pause and wonder if maybe they, too, could live without pretending. You don't demand attention, you command awareness, because you speak a truth that doesn't need to scream to be heard. And now the universe is answering you back, not just in soft signs or faint whispers, but in real, tangible shifts. Movement is happening, doors are opening, not the ones you banged on, but the ones that quietly unlocked the moment you stopped striving and started aligning. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Psalm 37:4. That desire wasn't planted in you by accident, and now heaven is beginning to water what you've carried in faith. Opportunities are finding you without force, without performance, without needing to explain why you're worthy of them. Relationships are arriving that feel like peace, not pressure. People who see you without draining you, who hear you without needing you to bleed just to prove you're real. Have you noticed how rivers don't try to push the rocks out of their way? They simply flow around them. They move with grace and persistence and still reach their destination. That's the rhythm your life has begun to mirror. Things are clearing not because it finally became easy, but because you finally became ready. Ava DuVernay, the filmmaker and visionary behind Selma and When They See Us, began directing in her 30s with no formal training. For years, doors were closed simply because of who she was, but she kept showing up, clear, grounded, and intentional. She once said, "If your dream only includes you, it's too small." And now, she doesn't just make films, she creates space for others to rise. Your journey has that same energy. You're not just rising, you're realigning the room you walk into. Mateo was a social worker who used to beg for opportunities, applying for roles beneath his qualifications just to stay afloat. But when he began volunteering in community-led healing circles, something shifted. He didn't chase titles, he poured out service. And without warning, an international non-profit sought him out, not because he asked, but because he had become the answer. Your gift will make room for you and bring you before great men. Proverbs 18:16. And your gift, your quiet consistency, your surrendered strength, is now making space where there once was none. So if life feels like it's shifting around you, it's not coincidence, it's confirmation. You're not stepping into ease because everything got lighter. You're stepping in because you got stronger. You stopped hiding, and now the world is adjusting to your truth. You didn't skip steps to get here. You lived every inch of this story, every detour, delay, and dark night of the soul. You took the long road with blistered feet and trembling faith, and still you showed up. Still you kept going. So don't let anyone make you feel like you have to explain that. You don't owe a transcript of your trials just so others can validate your triumph. You don't have to recount your scars for them to respect your strength. You don't have to unwrap old wounds to justify your worth. Your strength is self-evident. Your presence is proof. By their fruit you will recognize them. Matthew 7:16. What you've built speaks louder than any explanation ever could. You don't owe anyone your journey just to validate your destination. Let them wonder. Let them question how you got here. Let the mystery of your becoming speak louder than any biography you could offer, because the one who called you knows every detail. God saw it all. God kept count when no one else could. Every moment you stayed silent instead of striking back. Every late night surrender when your pillow caught the prayers your mouth couldn't speak aloud. Every act of obedience that felt unseen by the world but echoed loudly in heaven. Your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Matthew 6:6. And that reward isn't always applause, it's arrival. You are seen in every silent prayer, in every moment of restraint, in every quiet decision to not go back to the version of you that begged for crumbs when you were born to command the feast. Because yes, you were born for the feast, and you no longer have to justify your seat at the table. Chadwick Boseman, known to the world as Black Panther, once gave a commencement speech where he said, "Sometimes you need to feel the pain and sting of defeat to activate the real passion and purpose that God predestined inside of you." What most people didn't know was that he delivered those words while silently battling terminal illness. He didn't share every scar, but his strength was unmistakable. Your story carries the same silent weight, powerful, purposeful, and protected by God. Have you ever noticed how mountains don't explain their height? They just stand. How the moon doesn't prove its glow, it simply reflects. You've entered that same phase of your journey. You don't have to explain how you rose. Just rise. Let your life be the answer. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And in your stillness, your truth is thundering louder than anything you could say. Keep walking. The feast is already set. You've grown in a way that no algorithm can capture, no camera can show. This transformation didn't happen in a highlight reel. It happened in the hidden sacred places where no one applauded, but heaven leaned in. You've expanded at your core, not outwardly for show, but inwardly in substance. And because of that, from this point forward, the world is going to feel different. Not because it changed, but because you did. You're seeing through new eyes now. Your discernment is sharper. You no longer mistake noise for depth or movement for meaning, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Hebrews 5:14. Your spirit has been trained through fire, and now it knows what's real. You don't entertain what drains you, not out of pride, but out of protection. You've learned that peace is not a luxury, it's a boundary. You've stopped chasing what confuses you because you finally trust that clarity is your compass. And you no longer bargain with energy that feels off just because it's dressed like an opportunity. How many times did you say yes just to be polite, only to pay the price in your spirit? Not anymore. Think of how the eagle soars, high above the noise, far from the chaos below. It doesn't flap anxiously to stay aloft. It catches the wind and glides. That's what your life has started to reflect. You've stopped striving. You're flowing in discernment. And now, doors that once lured you with urgency no longer move you. You wait for what aligns, not what distracts. Michelle Obama, former First Lady and global advocate for education and empowerment, once said, "Your story is what you have, what you will always have. It is something to own." Through years in the public eye, she learned to move by conviction, not applause. She didn't pursue every platform, only the ones that matched her purpose. You're in that same season now. You don't move for noise, you move for truth. There was a man named Corin who once said yes to everything, every project, every call, every request, because he feared being forgotten. But after a long season of burnout and quiet reflection, he changed. He began saying no, not with guilt, but with grace. He stopped explaining, and one day someone told him, "There's something about you that feels peaceful now." That wasn't by accident. That was alignment. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. In that stillness, you've found your rhythm. In that knowing, you've found your authority. So if the world around you feels unfamiliar, that's because you're no longer navigating it from old patterns. You've grown beyond reaction. You're moving in revelation. And that changes everything. You've learned what peace actually feels like. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything going right, but the kind that remains even when things fall apart. And because of that, you no longer tolerate the chaos that used to feel normal. You've outgrown the noise, the environments, the conversations, the cycles that once felt familiar now feel foreign. Not because you think you're better, but because your soul remembers what it cost you to live in survival. You're not above anyone. You just stopped shrinking beneath yourself. You stopped dimming your light so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You stopped editing your spirit to fit into rooms that couldn't hold your truth. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. 1 Corinthians 13:11. That's what spiritual maturity looks like. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's the daily quiet refusal to shrink. It's the subtle choices, to walk away when your ego wants to stay, to forgive when your pride wants justice, to rest when the world says hustle. It's staying true when compromise would be easier. It's trusting that stillness is not stagnation and that surrender is not weakness. It's knowing deeply, securely, that your value doesn't fluctuate based on who recognizes it. LeBron James, a global icon and one of the greatest basketball players of all time, once said, "I don't need too much. Glamour and all that stuff don't excite me. I'm just grounded." Despite his fame, what defines him is not just his talent, it's his discipline, his peace, his refusal to perform for validation. Like you, he knows his value isn't up for debate. There's a woman named Malia who used to exhaust herself trying to be everything for everyone. She said yes to keep the peace, even when it cost her her own. But something shifted. She started saying no without apology, resting without guilt, and speaking her truth without softening it for approval. Now she walks into rooms quietly, but leaves people changed. Have you ever watched a mountain in stillness? It doesn't move, it doesn't shout, but its presence commands respect. That's you now. Your peace is your power. Your stability is your statement. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. Psalm 29:11. That peace isn't something you stumbled into. It's something you chose over and over again, even when it cost you what was familiar. And now you wear it not as a shield, but as a signature. This is what growth feels like. This is what walking in truth looks like. And now the rewards aren't just coming. They're right here. They've already arrived. Not just in the form of blessings you can count, but in the wholeness you now carry in your bones, in the way your body feels safer to live in the way your breath flows without tension, in the way your spirit feels less scattered, less frantic, more rooted. You no longer hustle to be seen. You no longer chase understanding to feel validated. You don't need to be explained to feel whole, because you finally recognize that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being aligned. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. Galatians 5:22. That fruit has been growing in you all along, sometimes in silence, sometimes in storms. But now it's ripening, and you're tasting the sweetness of the life you cultivated when no one was watching. Because the reward isn't just what you're about to receive, it's who you became while waiting. Isn't that the part no one sees? The quiet courage it took to keep showing up when there was no guarantee. The soft strength required to choose healing over hostility, discipline over distraction, love over numbness. Simone Biles, the most decorated gymnast in history, once stepped away from competition not because she couldn't continue, but because she chose to prioritize her mental and spiritual health. In doing so, she redefined what strength looks like. She became more than a champion. She became a standard of wholeness. That's what you've done. You stopped performing and started becoming. Darius, a father who spent years working a night shift just to pay for his daughter's schooling, used to feel invisible. But the day she stood on stage and thanked him, not just for funding her dreams, but for showing her how to live with honor, he realized something. The weight, the sacrifice, the long nights weren't the cost. They were the reward. Have you ever noticed how the air feels clearer after a long rain? Like the atmosphere itself has been reset. That's how your spirit feels now, cleansed, grounded, at peace. Not because the world finally changed, but because you did. And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Galatians 6:9. That season is no longer a distant promise. It's unfolding now, in and around you. Let that sink in. This is not just the end of the waiting. This is the beginning of the harvest. And the most beautiful part, the harvest already lives inside you. This isn't just a new chapter, it's a different book. The cover may still have your name, but the pages feel unfamiliar in the best way. The old rules no longer apply. The patterns that once held you hostage no longer dictate your direction. This is not a continuation of who you used to be. It's the emergence of who you were always meant to become. The version of you who needed everyone's approval doesn't run this story anymore. That version, the one who lowered her voice, shrank her spirit, and diluted her truth just to keep the peace, has retired her role. And you didn't lose her in bitterness. You released her in love. The version of you who mistook loyalty for self-betrayal doesn't hold the pen. The one who kept choosing others at the cost of herself, who called pain purpose just to feel worthy, no longer writes the dialogue. You do now. And this time, the script is sacred. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Isaiah 43:19. That new thing isn't just happening around you. It's rising from within you. And the hand that holds that pen, it was kissed by God before it ever knew what power it carried, before you knew how deeply you'd bleed or how fiercely you'd rise, before you ever doubted your worth. Heaven had already affirmed your authority. Have you noticed how wildflowers bloom in the places no one thinks to plant them? They break through dry ground without permission. That's you now. You're not waiting for validation. You're blooming because it's in your nature. Viola Davis, the Oscar-winning actress and powerful storyteller, once shared, "You can only shine if you're not hiding who you are." She rose from deep poverty and trauma, not by pretending to be whole, but by owning every piece of her truth. Like you, she reclaimed the pen to tell a story no one else could write. Elijah was a street painter who spent years creating murals on abandoned buildings. No one paid him, no one praised him, but he said each stroke felt like healing. One day, a gallery curator stumbled on his work and offered him a solo exhibit. When asked why he kept painting, he replied, "Because I needed to see color where there used to be gray." That's what your new book feels like, color returning to the canvas. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Ephesians 2:10. You are not just writing something new, you're walking in something eternal. So don't hesitate. Write with boldness, speak without shrinking, create without apology, because this is no longer a survival story, it's a story of sovereignty, and the pen has never been so steady in your hand. So write boldly, live truthfully, choose with confidence, not because you've never failed, but because every fall was a rehearsal for your rise. Every stumble strengthened your stance. Every misstep taught your spirit how to listen more closely, how to move more wisely. What if none of it was wasted? What if even your lowest points were laying the groundwork for your highest calling? The steps of a good person are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in their way. Though they fall, they shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds them with his hand. Psalm 37:23-24. Your falls weren't a detour. They were part of your divine choreography. Every decision, every heartbreak, every lonely moment, every time you started again, even while still bleeding from the last ending, heaven saw it all. Not one tear was missed. Not one choice made in quiet bravery went unnoticed. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. Psalm 56, verse 8. It was all counted. It was all held. It was all holy. Denzel Washington, one of the most respected actors of our time, once said, "Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship." Before becoming a household name, he was repeatedly told he didn't have the right look, voice, or path. But through rejection, he refined his gift. And now, his presence commands not just attention, but respect, just like yours. Leora had once walked away from a marriage, a city, and a life that looked perfect on paper. People whispered, some judged, but she kept walking, not because she had it all figured out, but because she knew peace wasn't something you pretend. Years later, she opened a trauma recovery center where her own story became someone else's survival map. Have you ever seen how sea glass forms? Sharp, broken shards tossed by waves for years, smoothed over time, shaped into something new, something beautiful. What was once jagged becomes treasured. That's your journey. What once cut now shines. You don't need to justify the weight you carry. You've earned the clarity. You've earned the stillness. You've earned the authority that doesn't have to shout. So, as you move forward, don't hold back. Don't shrink your wisdom to make others comfortable. Every scar carries sacredness. Every yes spoken in fear still counted. Every restart was recorded in heaven, not as failure, but as faith. And now, that faith is echoing back to you as favor. Because God is proud of you for persisting for presence, for choosing intimacy with him over applause from the world, for seeking alignment instead of attention, not because you were fearless, but because you moved anyway. That's what made it holy. You shook, you doubted, you wept, but you still obeyed. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to walk with God through it. The divine has been watching, not with judgment, but with joy. Heaven has kept the count of every time you showed up trembling, every time you forgave when it cost you, every time you chose light when darkness would have been easier. That kind of obedience doesn't go unnoticed. Heaven is already applauding, and this isn't just the end of a long test. It's the beginning of a long-awaited reward. You've earned more than just survival. You've earned honor, and it's here now. Angela Bassett, the acclaimed actress and cultural icon, once said, "Don't wait your turn. Bet on yourself and have the courage to step into your destiny." After years of being overlooked, she rose not by force, but by fiercely staying true to herself. The honor she walks in today wasn't handed to her. It was built in the shadows, just like yours. There's a man named Ezra who worked quietly behind the scenes at a shelter for years, organizing food, cleaning floors, praying silently over every bed. He was never thanked publicly, but one day a woman who'd once stayed there returned, not for food, but to say thank you. She told him, "Your quiet faith saved my life." He never asked for recognition, but honor found him anyway. Have you ever seen how the sun doesn't ask to be praised? It simply rises. It does its work faithfully, whether the world is watching or not. And still, life revolves around it. You've lived that same truth. And now the light you've carried so quietly is being revealed. This isn't the season of just getting by. This is the season of being lifted up. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you in due time. 1 Peter 5:6. And beloved, your time is now. As you step into this new space, this divinely timed unveiling of who you've become, remember this: everything you walked through wasn't in vain. Every delay, every detour, every tear, every silent act of surrender became the foundation for what you are now standing on. You didn't skip steps. You didn't fake your way here. You lived it. You endured it. And now you get to receive it. This is not just a reward. It is recognition from heaven that your faith was not empty. It was seen. It was sacred. And it is being honored. So from this moment forward, walk like the one God has called. Move like the one who no longer has to explain their worth. Speak like someone who remembers who they are and knows whose they are. If this message spoke to your spirit, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their divine resilience. Leave a comment and let others know how God has been moving in your life. If you'd like to support this message and help us continue spreading light, feel free to give through Super Thanks. We're deeply grateful for every seed sown. But whether you give or not, your presence here matters. May you continue to rise with clarity, walk in truth, and rest in the peace that can only come from knowing your story is held by God. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are right on time. Grace and honor are already waiting for you. Receive them. You've earned it.